Hello, class. Welcome. My name is Issa Martinez, and this is my community translation project presentation. And the topic I will be covering, as you can see, is the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. So, what was the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, or the IRCA? Well, it was first introduced to the United States Senate by Republican Senator of Wyoming, Alan K. Simpson, on May 23rd, 1985. It was signed into law by President Ronald Reagan on November 6th, 1986. Its main purpose was to introduce employer sanctions to business entities that knowingly hired undocumented immigrants. At the same time, it offered legal status to nearly 3 million undocumented immigrants. Some of the events that led to its formation were the increase in immigrants and refugees to the United States in the 1970s, the formation of the Select Commission on Immigration and Refugee Policy in 1978 to evaluate U.S. immigration laws, and its release report in 1981 on the issue of unlawful immigration that became the blueprint for the IRCA. Then, again, it was introduced in 1985 by Senator Alan Simpson and signed into law by President Ronald Reagan in 1986. The immediate impact of the IRCA was that it became unlawful to employ undocumented workers. Employers were now required to verify the identity and status of employment authorization of all of their employees. This resulted in an increase of workplace raids, discrimination, wage theft, and stress on mixed status families. On the other hand, because this was a bipartisan bill, concessions were made by the Republicans, and it resulted in the mass amnesty of nearly 3 million undocumented residents. That way, both Democrats and Republicans got both got what they wanted, which was the enhanced border security measures and funding. The lasting impact of the IRCA is that the enhanced border protection and criminalization of undocumented workers laid the groundwork for the modern criminalization of immigrants as a whole. It further divided immigrant communities and families along the lines of legality, and it continued the existing stream of undocumented farm workers for employers to take advantage of. Ultimately, it failed to stop the growing undocumented population and likely aided its growth instead. Some of the key concepts that the IRCA exhibits are nativism, capitalism, and institutional oppression. The IRCA exhibits nativism because its policies sought to exclude and criminalize undocumented immigrant participation in the workforce. The IRCA demonstrates capitalism because the industries relying on the vulnerable undocumented immigrant populations and their low wage labor due to limited bargaining power were still able to benefit financially despite the criminalization of hiring undocumented workers. Lastly, the IRCA is an example of institutional oppression by implementing exclusionary labor policies against undocumented immigrants in the form of employer sanctions and expanded border enforcement. In conclusion, the IRCA relates to ethnic studies because it demonstrates an intersection between law, ethnicity, race, and labor through its nativist policies, institutional oppression, and division of labor that it included. Author of the Historia Curandera, Aurora Levins Morales, writes, "The role of a socially committed historian is to use history to restore to the dehistoricized a sense of identity and possibility. When we examine the IRCA from the perspective of immigrants who were both excluded and included in mass amnesty, its facade as a pro-immigrant initiative begins to pretty much fall apart. The IRCA directly pertains to current social justice issues because it heavily influenced the current political climate surrounding undocumented immigration, border policy, and mass deportation. In relation to my own family, my grandfather was able to gain legal status as an undocumented immigrant farm worker through the IRCA in the 1980s. And my discussion question for the class is: does anyone from farm worker families have any stories about the Amnesty Act, workplace raids, or how these policies changed their family's life? Thank you for listening. Any feedback is much appreciated.